Good morning, everybody. I'm Sonali, and I'm with Barbara Wall today. And I'm just doing a brief opening as we move into the next 40 to 45 minutes of storytelling and weaving. We had so much fun doing this, and we were so honored to be here from our various places and then our various wisdom traditions and lines of ancestors. So just we were coming together around the topics of health and well-being, aging and dying, and transformation. And we're just going to move through some slides together that really speak to the stories that we were weaving for today. And so I'll turn it over to Barbara to share a little bit about our initial connections, just warming into the space. Yeah.
Miigwech, and before I share a little bit about how we connected, I want to introduce myself because I'm new to this group and you may or may not know me. So bonjour, muk chawinque indesnikas wawashkesh ododem, bodwe wadmi anishnave kwe minwa win tagoshi kwe andao, Shawnee, Oklahoma and Donjaba, Michisagi Anishinaabe Ake Indida. So as Sonali and I have been meeting and laughing and enjoying our time together, we both came to realize that within our own cultural and ancestral traditions that we're guided to look to the language and to our teachings and our learnings and our practices for understanding. And so embedded within that, or this version of our traditional intro in the language of my ancestors is relationality and responsibility and respect. So in sharing that practice of a traditional opening, I'm also reflecting my own learnings and teachings of Manoba Madzwin, or of living a good life. And of course, the living a good life involves aging in a good way and dying in a good way. So I just wanted to share that before we start to share our wonderful story of coming together and how this conversation, this narrative that we're going to share with you has come to be. So we had never met each other. And of course, we met over Zoom and started to share our stories. So I was sharing a bit about my story and my family, my life, the land that I'm connected to, and specifically the land of my ancestors on the western shores of Lake Michigan. And then I shared that I was Potawatomi, and I'll turn it to you.
Well, I was smiling quite a bit because weaving the threads from my ancestors, so from the lands of India and Sri Lanka, many deep, not just earth, but more about cosmos-based, universe-based traditions. And my parents found their way to what's now called East Chicago, Northwest Indiana. And as a little Sonali, I was 4 or 5. And at the time, our town was mostly white folks, not many folks of color, immigrants, etc. And children were making fun of me and my brother, calling us Indians, and in a very derogatory way, calling us the Potawatomi at the time as just a little one. And I was so moved is not the word. I mean, it was really hard as a child. And then I did a lot of sort of looking into and listening. And I asked my father to take us to a sacred site nearby and was just listening through his words and then my grandmother's words around some of the similarities in creation stories between the Potawatomi and between some of our tribal peoples in India. And so that for me I always hold that very close to my heart. And from that time on, had this, unique sort of special experience there with our families, especially my dad taking me to the sacred site. So that was one of the many connections. And Barbara and I had a good smile, maybe a little laugh through that time. And, just seeing that there were many things that were connecting us individually, but also coming through our stories. So water was so huge, both, in all kinds of ways. Movement through spiritual practice, through ritual. So we wanted to start with some beautiful visions of water. Barbara, did you have anything you wanted to share?
I wanted to share our connection through science and engineering as well.
Right.
And in introducing myself to you, I have to clearly admit that I am not a social scientist, that my background, my academic background, and until recently, my professional experience has been based in that very linear, rational, controlled, structured paradigm of engineering. So when I combine that with my cultural training and learning, I really end up being in a constant state, perhaps of confusion, but really a constant state of trying to understand how these two ways of being and ways of knowing can come together. And sharing stories, Sonali sharing stories of her father's engineering background. And it just deepened and broadened our connection and the synchronicity of what we're going to be speaking about today.
Mm-hmm. And brought to us about, the power of observation, both in our growing connection and observing and listening to each other's stories. And so we were also inspired by the cartographies of aging and the different paths of life. I feel like we'll share some resonances today around aging and dying and living well. And we'll talk more about some of the cartographies as well. But there was a lot of listening that happened in the 3 times that we met, and there and then outside of that as well. So maybe I'll move to the next piece of introduction, which is just some of the places we were listening through. Let me see if this is working. 1 second. Yeah, so spirals in terms of time and viewing, how life is structured and how it moves us towards living well and dying well and aging well. The spiral came up for us much in our different traditions, in the stories. And one of the things that came up for me, I was sharing with Barbara earlier, and also a few of you too, in separate conversations, is this way of looking at ways of being that are deeply rooted in some of our traditions, 1500 BC, of Shruti and Smriti. And Shruti it reminds me a lot of what we're talking about here through the series, is, that kind of knowledge, ways of being that are unchanging, that just are, that go beyond words, right? Speak to reality as it is. And it's often, we talk about it as what is heard by listening to the whole of creation. And then Smriti is, how do we manifest that? How do we bring it through these times? And our elders talk a lot about how, as we move into these modern times, our lack of capacity to be able to move through from the old wisdoms through the modern times. And so how do we continue to be committed to that? And that frames a little bit of how Barbara and I were talking too, right? So looking at these deeper wisdoms and then saying, as we're talking, we're moving through this pivotal series of elections, of violences through this, continent, so many things. What does it look to bring that through? So we were sitting with how what we learn in our traditions is that it's for all creatures, not just for people. It's not human-centric or anthropocentric. And that it's for the benefit of life and death and all in between. And we'll share how our visions of death and dying were actually fairly similar as well. And the tensions of bringing forth this wisdom and holding the co-opting, the appropriation, those things that happen as well. When I know my grandmother and our elders in our villages have said it's still important to share what we know and what can bring benefit. So thinking about the nature of life, the nature of being, what it means to exist, those sorts of things. We both love this visual of the elephants, and also the elephants play a prominent role now I know in the creation stories as well, as huge parts of sort of how the earth has come to be and how it continues. And just wanted to share, again, the power of the animal voice, the power of the plant voice throughout our different stories, and our accountability to these traditions too. And I just want to say to Vanessa and this group, and to Christine, for holding ritual and ceremony, how grateful we are and how vital this engagement is during the time of chaos, undue death, seeded destruction, violences, and transformation. I think Barbara will share a little bit about how our time will be for this next bit of storytelling.
Yes, what our intention is, and we'll see how it all emerges, is to really start to look at the ancient wisdoms as a way of perceiving the world, a way of moving through the world, of not only listening to the world, but asking for guidance and working with those other beings of creation all around aging and death and dying. And as you are participating in this, know, first of all, that we haven't practiced this. We want it to flow organically. So we'll see where we end up, where this journey takes us. But what we really invite you to do is to sit and listen with your heart and your mind and your body, and perhaps jot down notes, questions, doodle, however you need to record your feelings or your thoughts on what perhaps resonates with you, and then where you might have questions. And then we'll get into those questions during the discussion period after our break. Okay. I guess this is my cue. This is my slide. So what we talked about, what we shared, is looking initially at the big picture of that cycle of life in that spiral of time, and leading with some Bodwe Wadmi or Potawatomi Anishinaabe learnings and teachings, and deepening them and enhancing them through Sonali's ancient wisdoms and learnings. So am I on course here, Sonali? Okay. So this is referred to as a triangle teaching, and what this really is the big picture. And at the upper point of the triangle, if you can see in that slide the kind of very faint background, the layers of the Anishinaabe cosmos, that tip of the triangle is anchored in Manadowaning, which is the spirit world. And the sides of the triangle indicate or represent, symbolize the gift of life the journey of life across the bottom on Shkakmikwe as we walk on the earth, and then the spiral again back up to the spirit world when we transform, when we're done walking on this earth.
Oh. And in a lot of our oral traditions and writings, there's a strong piece here about that life doesn't come before death, but dying must come in order to live. And so there are different phases of moving through manifesting in form and then living through different principles, which in Barbara's traditions too, it's very present, and then allowing that wave that we are to come back into the ocean. So there was a similar sort of cyclical pattern, and one is not more valued than the other, or one part is not more valued than the other.
Oops, I should unmute myself before I speak.
I know, I do that all the time.
And in this slide on the left, Boganogijic is what we refer to as the hole in the sky, which is where we as Anishinaabe people are lowered from the spirit world down to the earth. And this has a direct connection to the star world, to that layer of creation below the Manadawaning, in that Boganogijic is the constellation of the Pleiades, or Pleiades, however you say it in Greek, I guess it is. But what's really unique, I think, about this constellation is that it is not a northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere specific constellation, and that this constellation can be seen from all places on the globe for at least 9 or 10 of the cycles of the moon that we all experience.
Yeah, and we discovered, again, lots of smiling and maybe giggling with Barbara, discovered that the earliest tribal peoples, there's record, and it shows up in ancient sculpture, of 7 goddesses of both destruction and life based on the Pleiades. So as early as 2000 BC, and my father has long talked to me about these, and we had a chance to see some of these ancient sculptures called the Sapta Matrikas, or the 7 mothers. And thinking about this coming from the deeper all sort of one and moving through manifestation through birth, these 7 matrikas support us with birth, but also destruction. And they are incredibly complex. So they hold qualities of destruction, of things that we're also troubled by and working on, along with the antidotes. Each one has a manifestation of that. And it reminded me actually of some of, so one of them is Kumari, and Kumari has the quality that she's working on and embodies is illusion and delusion. And so I was making ties to Jem Bendel's article on the delusion of surety and some of what comes up in the denials. It's so crucial to that life is about cultivating these principles, right? And so we'll see more about that in a minute around the deeper connections. Yeah, and actually I might go back one just to use that triangle again, Barbara, for you. Shikakmikwe.
Right. So this next portion of the teachings and the learnings that I'm really honored to share with you is that left side of this triangle, as we as spirits are given a human body and lowered through Baganogijik, through that hole in the sky. And you can go back to that next, or the next triangle's left.
Oh, there's the hole.
So there's the hole. and the being, so kenagego ejtamaging can be loosely translated to that thing that made everything. Many Anishinaabe people refer to that being as Getcheshemnado, which is that great, kind, forgiving spirit, with no gender association whatsoever. And we're told that as we are in spirit form, we make an agreement with this being, this life energy, as to what we're going to do when we come down to this earthly plane. So we're given shkeh b'madzuin, we're given a new life in human form. And as we are lowered through that hole, we're given all that we need to be able to fulfill that life's work. And we're given our language, we're given our spirit name, and we're given the teachings, the foundational teachings of the 7 grandfathers. And as we are lowered, we begin to embody and think about and listen to how we will embody those 7 grandfather teachings. And those teachings include love and bravery, truth and honesty, respect, humility, and wisdom. And using those concepts, those notions to guide our actions and guide our way of being allows us to walk gently on Shkakmikwe within those relationships, within a respectful relationship and in responsibility.
So in our various traditions, there are, the Sapta Matrikas and their qualities that address pride, ego, anger that is not moved through the body but becomes stuck. And then also these other qualities like balance, called upeka, or equanimity. So how do you nurture balance and wholeness? Or loving kindness is the basis of everything, called metta, right? In some of the Buddhist and ancient, even older than that, traditions. So everything coming from love in many forms, including destruction when necessary. And compassion is called karuna, is more about humility and bravery both. So it means the quivering of the heart, allowing our hearts to be soft and open while also being, in many cases, like the matrikas, warriors, or they're known as the goddesses on the battlefield, but not always in battle, but just moving through life. Respect and relationality is something we call mudita. So how can we be in deep connection with others and rejoice in their joys, feel their sorrows, but rejoice in their joys? So those qualities are really important, and to live our potential as the junior partners we are in the greater ecology, or ecologies and cosmologies, and then also there's a piece about through the qualities maintaining a place of emptiness. And emptiness just meaning not wed to solid, to rigid, to blockage, but to really strive for some emptiness where things come in and move through and we get to know the shadows really well and the messiness and the destruction. Mm-hmm. And the other part is that I don't know, Barbara, if this is in what you were talking about too in practices, but how to do what we need to do while stilling. There's something about vibration in our creation story, right? So that creation came from a sound, and that this manifestation moving through these various sides of the triangle are so much about vibrational manifestation. And how do we hear the rhythm that of the planet and of the cosmos and align with that, right? So how do we get into spaces of deep listening?
Thank you for sharing that that little snippet about that vibrational energy. And we didn't share this before in our initial meetings, but within our creation story, the creation of the universe, again, that first action is a sound. And it's that sound of the shaking of seeds in a gourd. And that's that vibrational energy of all of life. And I guess I also wanted to share a bit about when you were talking about that need to acknowledge and recognize and immerse ourselves in that emptiness, to allow things to move through us as we age, as we transform. When many times when those 7 grandfather teachings and then the 7 stages of life, which I'll talk about in a little bit, are taught, and they're taught in a circle format. That circle is divided into 8 sections, but there's a teaching of 7, and that 8th section is the unknown, is that emptiness that allows us to move through and allows us to understand also the vastness of the great mystery of the spiral of life and the spiral of time, and that we will never, ever know everything. And I think that's a really important thing for those of us who are trained as scientists, that we can't know everything.
Yeah. Shall we go to the last side of the triangle then, Barbara? West Node?
I wanted to talk a little bit about that, what's that bottom side of the triangle. And we are taught to, using those 7 grandfather teachings, those guiding values, to live within, again, those respectful, reciprocal, responsible relationships, but to also live through and by the pipe. So this is a sketch, not very good sketch, but of that sacred tool that we use in communicating with all of the cosmos. And many of our pipe stems have 7 spirals on them, and that's the 7 stages of life that is akin to those cartographies of aging and those different stages of life. And as we move through those, and as we spiral from day to night through light and dark, through known and unknown, we get to the end of our earth journey. And that's represented by a pipe bowl in which the medicine has been smoked. That medicine is used up. That medicine of our lives is done. Gi nagij tiyan means when you're finished. And that only means when you're finished on this earthly plane. where death is not a final stage. It's just a transformation.
I was thinking about the elders in my dad's temple have reintroduced me to this prayer on death and liberation that's fairly old, maybe 2000-ish BC. And there's a beautiful, I shared a little bit of this with you, Barbara, Uraba Makiva Bandhanat, which means may I grow in fullness like the cucumber, and then be released when my time is what it needs to be. And it's an interplay with the plant itself, the roots and the actual stems, and a very embodied sense of whatever time death is, that it is the time for fullness and to let go. And then Mrityor Mukshya Mamritat means through this cultivation of qualities, may I befriend death, may I seek liberation, and liberation will happen through that, and come back to that changeless place of the deepest waters, essentially. So just sitting with the, the resonances between and amongst.
And I think it's also important for me to mention that those 7 stages of life are that ideal progression, and it's important for all of us, and in particular for our youth who have so many struggles facing them, to understand that not all of us progress through this ideal spiral, that many times we may be stuck, or not stuck, but remain in one stage of life. And also that it's important to acknowledge that dying happens in all of these stages of life. That many of our people, and when I say our people, I mean our people as a collective, all of us don't make it through infancy, or don't even make it through that being lower down to the earth, right? Let alone to making it through that progression and living to the time of the elder stage of life and wisdom. So I think it's important. And again, that ties back to the cartographies of aging, that dying is happening all the time, whether it's us as the younger brothers and sisters, or whether it's all of our relatives and relations around us. Miigwech.
Okay to go here?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So this is the third side of that triangle, when we're done. And our stories, our learnings, our teachings, our lived experience, and our connection to the cosmos tell us that when we're done, when our work is done on this earth, that there's a transformation, and that we return home. We return home guided by the North Star, Giwedanung, and that the name of the North Star in our language really means the going home star. So it could be literal, it could be metaphorical, philosophical, or spiritual. But what happens, what I had been taught and what I had learned by helping usher my partner, my spirit partner, through this transition, is that we're met by 2 spirits, Nij Manadosag. So a grandmother and a grandfather who help us to begin that navigation of going home. And it involves water. It involves, from our tradition of using a wigwasi jiman or a birch bark canoe. And again, a literal mode of transportation, but also in our spiritual teachings, we go between worlds in a canoe. And we come through, we travel through, and we travel towards Wasnode, which is the word for those northern lights. And what that symbolizes is our ancestors on the other side of that water that we're navigating to go home. They've lit a fire for us to welcome us home, to celebrate our arrival home, to be with them again. And that the northern lights are really a reflection in the sky of that fire that our ancestors have lit. And when we come home, we return to Mano Dewenjkeka, which you may remember cartoons, if you're my age, cartoons about the Indians and the happy hunting grounds. And that's truly what Mano Dewenjkeka means, is the happy hunting grounds. We're returning to ourselves. We're returning to our old way of life when we lived in close relationship and responsibility with the land. And we survived and continue to survive through hunting and harvesting. So that's that transformation. We leave that human body and we go home. We go home to that original life, to that original life force. How?
And so thinking about moving into this, moving through Wasnode, there's a deep belief that the practices of the seven in what Barbara shared will assist us in that journey to Wasnode. So it's part of that whole cycle, the capacities necessary to be in the cycle with the laws of harmony and nature. And so we're trying, there's a piece here about sitting with the deathless in death and the one in many as almost like guiding principles along the boat, as Barbara was talking about, you know? And there's a huge engagement in the last stages of life, whether it's sudden and or more consciously experienced, of the rahasya, which is being with the great mystery, and surrendering, which is a quality that we strive to cultivate through this time on the bottom of the triangle. But a great amount of surrender. And a tie that I was just making, Barbara, I didn't before, was around fire, right? So the other thing Barbara and I, through our experiences, have been near and around death and dying in so many different forms, whether it's people close to us or being in hospice, for me working in hospice. And there, from our brothers, sisters, and trans people in Tibet, there's a huge amount of work done around the bardos, the gaps between life and death and life in many forms, and also a watching of the elements as someone is dying, as the body is dying. So the earth, the body gets heavy, and in that rounding of the triangle, this is happening. And then there's a dissolution of water. And through that, as you move to the dissolution of air, is a great amount of energy. The body actually surges with energy. And in our teachings, it's about that surging of energy to support in the transition, right? And then the dissolution of fire is what so fire is the conduit to move further into Wasnode as well. And then there's just the deeper merging of the wave with the deeper waters as we move to the top of the triangle. So yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, so how does this tie in to really what we're talking about, and what we're thinking about and sitting with today in terms of living well and dying well, and through that process of aging. And one of the things that the two of us spoke about in our several meetings is that need, or that purpose of our lives, to bring forward those ancient teachings, those ancient learnings and ancient wisdoms into today, and into all of those challenges that we as a society, as a global society, are facing. And I just want to share that, how important, for at least speaking very personally for myself, how important an understanding of this triangle and of this life's journey through the spiral of time has been for me, to be able to surrender and to live in a good way, to live well and to age well, and to pick up those responsibilities that become the bundles that we carry as we age, and as we approach, as we go from adulthood to becoming elders, and becoming those parts of our communities, those beings in our communities that our youth seek for the wisdom and the knowledge, and how to survive in this world.
Yeah, one of the things Barbara and I talked about was, my daughter Shanti, who's 17 and a half, and her friends moving through this time with the US election and the amount of violence happening in Portland and many other cities. And violence is part of the transformation, and then also undue violence against, Black, Indigenous people of color and queer people, and beyond. Uh, and her question was, which Barbara had asked me to share, was how are we going to heal and find wholeness through all of this hatred? Right? So, what are the qualities? And also, her and her friends naming those qualities they want in these people who are still running the institutions that, as they are crumbling, also. And attention, I feel important to name, is doing a lot of work in these institutional settings, these, US based governments, different bureaucracies, higher ed, is the deepest yearning is for experiences and practices like this that we're sharing, or that many of you already have brought to the fold in the series. And the tensions are that the institutions are putting the nails in the wall, saying, no, we want business as usual, right? We don't want to cultivate these. So it's a very interesting thing in the death and dying, the social and institutional death and dying places, as well as capitalist, corporate, and the like. So, and then there are signals. So something that the archetype that I was given a long time ago, and then it has more of a shape now, is one of, social healer, social naturopath, social doctor, right? Something to that effect. And so it's listening for the symptoms, listening for the signals. So at least here we're hearing a lot about how do we support people with greater empathy? How do we cultivate collective care, kindness for all? You're starting to hear that in the narrative, even in the news, right? And so the way I was talking to my dad about this as we were reading our old traditions this past week was that those are signals. They're like little shoots coming up through the earthquakes, saying this is life starting to reach out, those qualities, those practices. And it comes from a deeper place, not just from a place of market, but a much deeper place. So I think in these spaces, we just wanted to share too that many of these institutions are seeking this while fighting, denying, negating, and killing it at the same time. And that has been around for a while. I've learned a lot from Vanessa, Sharon, Sarah, others on this beautiful call about that. Yeah, there's more in this area, but we wanted to spend some time thinking about how does it move through these current moments in our psyches and in our communities, in our environmental experiences of destruction, all of that. We're just beginning to sit with that. And so with that, I think Barbara, unless you have something else to share too as we close for our sort of this time of storytelling before
we have a break and a discussion, I think that for all of us, no matter what ancient wisdom we're tied to, we have that tie. And that there's I see in the students that I work with, a real hunger for a deeper connection, a spiritual connection. And when we share from an Indigenous perspective our own traditions, we're always encouraging our students to seek this understanding, to seek these foundational teachings and learnings through their own traditions. Because when we really take it back, when we strip away the dogma of organized religions and we focus on spirituality, there is so much synergy, there is so much connection and commonality and overlap, that if we can all return to that, then we can use those teachings to shift that paradigm, to shift the paradigm and begin to use that collective care and the love and the wisdom to address these destructive actions that are happening in mainstream society. Miigwech.
So I think then we will move into a break and then Peter will share. Does that sound okay, Vanessa? Or okay. And Barbara, we were going with the flow around a break invitation. Do you have any preferences or thoughts?
Besides a biological break for some of us, our furry friends who are sitting here panting, I think taking the opportunity to breathe deep, to be still, to perhaps take a drink of water and think about your connection to water and think about how water all connects us may be a good way of grounding ourselves as we transition from this storytelling into sharing in the discussion.
Okay.
Bonjour. I should be again in Indigo. She can do them. Mrs. Saga would you do Mission Abbey and down. And we credit Minoa Six Nations and Don Jaba. Good to see all of you smiling faces over there. And some are just words on a screen here, but I imagine you're smiling anyway. So I quite enjoyed the presentation so far. And about 1985, I was sitting and I took dictation. And so this is what was dictated to me. The grandfather. Long ago in the forgotten times, there lived a hunter, a warrior of some distinction, who with his wives brought to the earth smaller hunters, and the wives were the smaller hunters of his friends. He hunted well and rode the fastest horses, ran with the fastest men, learned much, saw many things. Then came white men and guns. Hunting changed. The hunter grew old. The day came when he had the fastest horses, but he did not ride. He sat and watched with the other older hunters, some moving faster than he, none wishing more than he that he could still run with the fastest of men, for he was a hunter, a warrior. Slowly his power left him, till one day he moved like his friend the turtle. Like his friend, he welcomed the sun and rest. The earth beckoned him. He grew weary, feeling useless, not able to hunt, not wanting to go on, trapped with an eagle's mind in a turtle's body. One night he slept, the smell of the earth strong in his nostrils. As he lay there, his breathing troubled. A spirit came to him. I am the father of your father's father. Like you, I was a hunter. Your sons have sent for me. They watch you smell the earth. They see you are troubled. They say you are a grandfather. I too welcome the earth, too proud to let my sons hunt for me, not knowing until the earth had taken me that the things I knew would make better hunters of my sons and their sons, not knowing that someday they would sit by the fire with nothing to say, with no stories to tell, because I was a hunter, because I welcomed the earth too soon, because I was not a grandfather. Before the earth claims you, I must tell you what I never told them. To each there is a season, to everything there is a time. When the season of the hunter is over, it is not the season of the earth. It is the season to tell stories, to talk to the young, for what you have seen may never be seen again. Awake now, talk to the young, and your sons and your sons' sons will sit by the fire with stories to tell, because you did not miss the season of being a grandfather. The hunter awoke, and a new season was born. At least, that's what my grandfather told me. So those words came in 1985, and I was watching my dad as he was getting weaker and having a hard time getting around. And I wrote those words for him, or I should say, I took dictation for him. And so in what was presented already, I have come to believe that when you're born, you begin to die. That process starts the minute you get here. And that doesn't mean to say that you don't develop that you don't grow. It's the process of growing. And when that spiral pipe stem was mentioned, I was thinking that in the drawer behind me, I have this was a spiral pipe stem that I made last year, the year before, and it's the first time I ever made a spiral pipe stem. And I don't have 7 spirals on there. There's only 6, so I don't know if that's going to be a short-lived or what, but that's just the way it looks, and that's the way it came to me, so that's the way I made it. And I was interested in these triangle teachings because I never saw any triangle teachings before. All the teachings I have seen never had any triangles in them, but so I was interested in that. And I know that for our people, that we were displaced and moved around, and some people in different areas carry stories and teachings that are not carried in other areas, and that the movement of people may have enabled some groups to retain things that others don't have. And so I'm glad to see that was shared. because I'm always looking for more teachings. And when we get old, I don't know when that happens, but sometimes I'm told we get old sometime. And part of that process, I think, is living and trying to maintain what you have as much as you can, which means you can't sit around with your thumb stuck someplace. You have to move around. You have to be doing something. And I think when we stop doing things is when we get old. That's just my observation. So I'm trying to not get old. I'm trying to move all the time. And I can't really sit around anyway. I just can't do that. And so I was interested to see those 7 women, because we have the 7 grandfather teachings, and then another culture has 7 women. And so I'm wondering if those are the wives of the 7 grandfathers. But it's I've heard this before when I talk to people from other parts of the world, that our teachings are really similar to theirs. And it brings me back to a conclusion I came to a long time ago, that we were all given the directions and instructions of how to live here. And I don't care where you came from. At one time, we all had the same instructions. And it's who hung on to them the longest. Those are the ones who are able to live without destroying the planet. So if you go into the Amazon and talk to those uncontacted people, they are still following the original instructions, the ones that were given that allowed them to stay there, to live without destroying. And when I was thinking about how our discussions have gone, and I think in my comments last week, I said, I don't think the answer lies in looking ahead. The answer to our predicament lies in looking back, not ahead. And I always say that you can't know where you're going unless you look in the mirror to see where you've been. And so this aging process, I think when I look at this, when I go and sit out in creation and you start looking at trees, I can be sitting beside a tree that's my age. And I can be sitting beside a tree that's twice my age. And that tree that's twice my age is still a young tree. And because we have forgotten our instructions, we have no problem cutting down the rainforest. We have no problem cutting down a 1,000-year-old tree. It doesn't bother us at all. We just cut it down. And we don't think about the fact that no one will see a tree that old again for maybe 10 generations or 20 generations. And those trees may never, ever be allowed to get old. And so we disrupt all these cycles. And you start looking at the age of the earth and the age of these trees. And when we lose our language, we lose our extended memory because we don't have the stories that extend our memory. And so we make mistakes because we don't remember what happened last time we made the mistake. And the answers are in those stories, that extended memory. And that's why I say we need to look back to find out how to go ahead. And, I think about how when we share these teachings, a lot of people won't get this. They won't connect. It's just a story. And I think because we don't live long enough, we make too many mistakes because we don't get to see the results of our mistakes. And we blame the mistakes that someone else made 500 years ago or 400 years ago or 200 years ago. We blame that person for making that mistake. But we don't realize we're making the same mistake again. Like, that's why the stories are so important, I think, is that it's an extension of human memory to know what happened. And when we look at our teachings, this teaching that was shared, this language is a bit different than Ojibwe, but it's real close. And but the teachings are almost the same as what I know. There's a little bit difference in the story, but I look at, when I talk to people, the young people, I say I'm a lot closer to the exit door than I am the entrance. And I can't do anything about that. I mean, we look at our lives and how we could have changed or how we could have done better or whatever. And our only hope is to pass on the knowledge of our mistakes so that somebody else doesn't make them. And, I got a lot of knowledge to pass on because I made a lot of mistakes. And I'm still making them. But I think about my dad a lot. He's been gone since 1988. And, all the things I should have asked him, and I tell students, go find the oldest person in your family that you trust, that you really trust, and go ask them, what do you wish someone had made you learn when you were young? It's really important because that's when you find out what mistakes were made. What could you have used? What did you wish? Those are the important things to learn, is what your older relatives wish they had learned. And you don't know these things until you get old. You don't know how bad a mistake or how whatever it is until you get older, because you don't see the result right away. And I told my my son when he started to smoke wacky weed, I said, that is medicine, but are you sick? Do you need that? Would you take cancer medicine, chemotherapy, if you weren't sick? I said, the difference between that? I said, go on the stove, put a frying pan on there, turn on the burner on high, and wait till it gets red. Then go stick your hand on that frying pan. And he said, I won't do that. I'll get burnt. I said, well, you do drugs, it's the same thing, except you can't feel yourself getting burnt. And, it's all in how we look at things. And so anyway, he never ever just stick his hand in the frying pan. And he slowly figured out that those other things weren't good. And that's the process of learning. And I hope he passes that on to his kids too. So, Miigwech, I'm not going to talk too much. That's enough, I think. So, we will discuss on. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Peter. Thank you. Obrigada.
So we can go about it like we've done before. If you would like to speak, you can raise your hand, which is in the participant section. Lin Mario has raised his hand. But you can also raise your hand in the camera, and Kira and I will try to make sure we're on track. Holy Mario.
Thank you for this, Sonali, Barbara, and Peter. I think one of the difficulties we're facing at the moment, as we've seen in previous sessions, is and as the question we're continually facing is, what do we do at the moment? So for me, that brings to mind the question of how do we deal with the knowledges, with inherited knowledges, right? Which is, I won't use the word tradition because I come from a people who are diasporic, and we're spread over 5 continents. So at one time we did have a tradition, but we have learned to recontextualize that tradition according to the places, the knowledges we acquire wherever we are. So one of the things that worries us is, how do we survive if we take a particular set of knowledge as being orthodox and established? And one of the things that we have come to learn is that knowledge has two sides to it. The side which is learning, and the side which is teaching. And Sonali mentioned the Smriti and the Shruti. And I think it's important to take into account these two aspects of knowledge. And this is what distinguishes something which Barbara also mentioned, what distinguishes religions from spirituality, where religions hold on in general to a book, not all, but to hold on to established and fixed knowledge. Spirituality is an openness to learning. And as Peter was talking about just now, about forgetting or unlearning previous teachings, I think we need to be open. If we fall into holding on to our orthodoxies and our established knowledges, we're not going to be able to learn from new times, new situations, new experiences which our ancestors did not face. So this doesn't mean that we are discarding their teachings. It means that we are not allowing their teachings to die by reinterpreting them. So learning and teaching in relation as the two sides of knowledge have got to do with death and dying. So if we're going to hold on at all costs to orthodox teaching, the teaching of our ancestors, then we are probably going to die. We're going to face the loss of validity of much of the knowledge that we hold on to. So life may also be in our capacity of learning. And in our knowledge is let's say in my family, I hesitate to use the word tradition because we don't hold on to a fixed body of learning. So death comes with the loss of any kind of living force, living energy. And a living energy, in order to live, needs to constantly learn. It needs to constantly be different in the same body. Because if you insist on living by holding on to the same knowledge that you were born with or you had at one time, then you're going to face extinction. So life and death for us are very much connected to teaching and learning. So then what we call knowledge is what we learn at the end of this process from those who came before us. It's very possible for us in our beliefs for the old to learn from the young. Whatever I learned when I was 25, my grandmother and my father were keen to know what they could learn from me. So there's that, and it wasn't just symbolically just an interest in wanting to know what I knew, but so that they could go on living, because their knowledge would not, their process of developing knowledge would not stop. And so there's that dialogic process between, which we have already heard, between living and dying, between learning and teaching. And it's also about letting go of what the knowledge that we have been handed down. And it's interesting what I have learned from indigenous cultures in the Amazon here in Brazil is that the concept of the past, and these are cultures which are oral cultures, so their knowledge is not written down. The concept of the past is always there, but it's not always the same past. So the past is always what we value and what we learn from, but it's also what we teach into. So it's important for us to have a concept of where we come from, our past, but it's also important to keep updating this past so it remains alive. I think I just wanted to add on to the important learnings we've had so far from the three of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. I think Bill would like to respond.
Bill, you need to unmute.
Okay, how about now? All right, thank you, Azul. Thank you, Mario. Also, I want to say to Sonali and to Barbara and to my brother Peter, how much your presentations resonated with my spirit and with my ancient traditions and ancient wisdom. So many of the concepts and ideas that you spoke about, I find them very much present in our ancient wisdom tradition that we call here on this plane Ifa. And I remember the last opportunity that I had to be present. We talked a little bit about not having a language to be useful in ways of understanding the complexity of what we're living, what we're calling this trap of modernity. But as I was listening to Sonali and to Barbara and to Peter, I was thinking that maybe within the framework of these traditions of ancient wisdom, there are ideas, there are concepts, there are meanings, there is language that can help us to begin a process of rethinking ourselves within the framework of our existence. To Mario's comments, it is constantly this tension of, and Barbara kind of touched on this in terms of how do we bring this into today? How do we bring this wisdom? How do we bring these teachings into today and make them relevant to our lives, and particularly to our young people and to those who are, as Mario suggested, developing new systems of knowledge and understanding, and how do we weave these ancient systems of what we call ancient systems of wisdom with these new systems of wisdom and knowledge that are being born. And important challenge for us. But I guess I do feel, Mario, that I don't want to lose this ancient wisdom that I have had the opportunity to rediscover after not having the opportunity over such a long period of my life to have a connection to this wisdom and to have had the opportunity to rediscover it, I'm not prepared to say that it can disappear or it should disappear. And I want to talk about that with you because that is what is providing a foundation for me to really begin to rethink who I am and to begin to reorient my life and my existence and to think about a different set of values, different set of engagements with you, with the earth, with life itself. And so my question becomes, how do you see, what's the possibility for us weaving these stories from the past that obviously for many people that we call traditional or who, as our brother Peter mentioned, who have been able to retain some of this ancient wisdom or these ancient instructions. And I really like that perspective that maybe it's these ancient instructions about how to engage with this journey on the planet. How do we weave? How can we begin to weave this knowledge of our that we're calling in this learning that you kind of categorize in the framework of spirituality with the spiritualities that are being born and that are being lived by ourselves and by others as we make our way through this journey? How do we bring those together? How do we create the possibility of learning from both of those important experiences?
Is that addressed to me, Bill?
Well, it's addressed to the family, but if you want to begin the discussion or respond, I'm more than happy to hear you.
Okay, I wasn't I wasn't talking about the loss of tradition. I was talking about the updating of tradition.
Yes.
Right? But I think it comes from it depends on how you see divinity, how you see the great source. If you see the great source as do the religions of the book as something defined, occupying a defined physical form, and something that is omnipotent, omniscient, and whatever, then you have a particular kind of the divinity as being fixed, and you have a knowledge of spiritual knowledge as being unchangeable, and that's where you get. It's easier to develop a concept of orthodoxy. Okay?
Yes.
But if you come from a different perspective, as I do, where the origin is the uncreated,
Yes.
right? So it comes before creation. So therefore, it has no specific form. It is the source of all. Right? So as it has no specific form, all we can do as being part of creation is to imagine it, to reflect on it, and to imagine it in different ways. And depending on how we imagine it, we will imagine it through, and you mentioned the importance of language. Language is part of creation. So all we can do is use creation to imagine the uncreated.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So what I'm just saying is that this is an important aspect which we should think about rather than looking at it in a linear perspective from the origin to the moment, looking at the moment as part of the origin, right? And as the origin is something which is constantly also learning from what is happening in creation. So it's weaving. Certainly the metaphor of weaving is extremely important. It's not the loss of knowledge, right? It's the reinterpretation or the updating, if you like, of knowledge.
Ashe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. I know, Vanessa, you have something to say, and then
Yeah, the both Bill and Limario have been my mentors. So it's really interesting to see them in conversation. And Bill, I just remembered a story you told me, and that was extremely important for me to be able to engage with other knowledges in a very different way. And that really allowed me to be in ceremony where I believe with rather than believe in. And that is something that you showed me. So your story was about, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to tell it exactly, but it was imagining the earth as a wool yarn, and all the connections and all the dances of the connections crisscrossing around the globe. And meaning, the meanings that we put, the stories that we tell are the clothes that we put on top of that washing line.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
sometimes these meanings are very thick, and sometimes they are wavy, like silk. And if they're very thick, they sometimes stop that washing line from actually dancing, which is what it's supposed to do, which is the movement of spirituality. And if the meaning gets too thick, it stops you from seeing what is actually trying to move you, because the idea of the clothes is to help us dance with the spirituality that is in there. So if the thicker the meaning is, the less it's going to be able to reflect the movement that we need to do. And the thinner this meaning is, and probably more malleable and flexible and changing, the more we will be dancing with the thing itself. It's the same as I was told it was a Sufi thing about it, religion, or the texts and scripts we have are the finger pointing to the moon. But most people want the scripts. They don't want the moon, right? So how do we figure out a way of bringing all these knowledges together where we focus on the moon, which is the movement and the dance of responsibility and accountability and humility and humor, even, that we have to dance rather than the scripts that make that dance possible? Because if we focus on the script, the dance may be missed in the process. And I just wanted to check, because this is what you taught me. So thank you for that teaching.
Thank you, Ashe.
Next up is Dougal. I think you want to respond.
Thank you. I'm feeling very lucky to sit in this circle with this lively dance of stories that's going on. And I wanted to throw a couple of moves into it. One that came to mind as I was listening to you, both Lynn, Mario, and Bill. One of my teachers, Alan Garner, who comes from a rural area of the northwest of England and holds some very old traditions that came down in his family there that give you clues as to the lost indigeneity of the country that I was born in and grew up in. He has spent his life writing books. His early books were known as children's books. All of his books have at their heart objects. All of his books have at their heart myths. And he wrote an essay a long time ago about working with myth, where he said, you can take a myth and you can try and be as faithful as possible to some earlier telling, and that can be a proper piece of museum work. But to be faithful to the life of the myth, you can't retell it the way it was told last time. You have to tell it the way that it's calling to be told now. And I think of that as being in an image that comes from the culture of the book that I had my roots in. A seed falls into the ground and dies in order for it to live again. And to me, that's what you're speaking to in the updating of the tradition. And at the same time, in a word like updating, I hear the dynamic of modernity and its Promethean tendencies. Prometheus from the Greek myths literally Prometheus means foresight, the one who is looking forwards into the future. And modernity likes to think that we travel through time looking forwards into the future. We don't. We travel through time looking backwards. You know, the past is where we're all headed sooner or later. I loved that phrase about the past is what we teach into, because that's where we're going. And Ivan Illich, who is another of my teachers through his books and through the web of friendships that he created and that I found a way into, he wrote a long time ago about Prometheus and Epimetheus and the need for the rebirth of Epimethean man. Epimetheus is the brother of Prometheus. Epimetheus means hindsight, looking backwards, the fool, stumbling towards a direction that he's not looking in. But in the Greek myth, Epimetheus is the one who receives Pandora, whose name means the all-giver, who brings all of the evils into the world, but also hope. He receives Pandora as a gift from the gods. And it is the children of Epimetheus and Pandora and Prometheus and his wife, whose name I have forgotten, who become the Noah and Mrs. Noah of Greek myth. They re-people the earth after the flood in the Greek story. And so Illich was saying it's not about rejecting the Promethean and devoting ourselves to the Epimethean. The rebirth of Epimethean man is learning to dance again between the two. But then I think of Vanessa and Elwood's braiding text, because that dance can only begin if we're very clear that the Promethean has the authority. It has the power, the legacy of modernity, updating, you know, Microsoft, Google, they're all into updating. So we have to learn to dance between looking ahead and looking behind. And that's where the weaving comes in, because Keith Johnstone, the improvisation teacher, says when you're improvising a story, you should be like a person walking backwards, not worrying about what's coming next, but looking for the moment when you can weave something from earlier in the story back in. And that moment will be the most satisfying moment for you as the storyteller and for everyone in the room. And I think the reason it's the most satisfying moment, Johnston doesn't say this, but I think it's because the moment when we weave something from earlier in the story back in, we have the experience that the past still matters in the present. And unless the past matters, then we don't matter, because the past is where we are all headed. But in that moment where the connection happens and we see that time is something stranger and trickier than this line between the past and the present and the future, then we have the experience of being part of something that matters.
Haruko? It should be at the bottom left.
Hey.
There we go.
Okay. This has been a really good series for me because it's hitting on things that trigger sort of an aha kind of feeling. There's something that I'm going through in which on one level I'm getting my body is going older, but inside of me is going younger. And the younger, I feel, is the one that has thrown off some things that were like plaque on my consciousness. And instead, I'm finding myself being much more open and looking to the wisdom in the young people, that because they are living in this moment, they're growing up in this moment, and they have information, wisdom, and experience that I haven't had. But out of that is this kind of looking forward, but being back and then coming forward. So there's this automatic, organic kind of weaving happening in me, that things that I didn't know but I did now make sense. And what is happening is very slowly a kind of trust in the uncertainty and the unknown, which is allowing me to jump when something in me vibrates and says go. And so I can go without knowing what is ahead, what I'm going into. If I can listen to this tuning fork inside myself that is vibrating both past and present, so that I can move into something that is totally unknown, unfamiliar, and it's actually making the quality of my life much richer. So in the next part of this life, however that may last, I get an understanding that the death of some things are important to really live. And the idea that we're always dying is true. I mean, biologically, you know that, because I get in the shower, I look in the little filter, and there's my skin cells. There's my hair that's been falling out. And so there's this sense that on one level, I am dying in a constant stream of dying. But at the same time, on another level, I feel like I'm being born in a constant state of being born. So there's this weaving that is happening organically that is not about language as I know it. It's not text and words. It's something much deeper, a language that's much deeper, that's starting to vibrate in me. And it's that language that I trust, because I have twice in my life lost everything. I have no original culture. I have no parents. And as a child, I was really traumatized by that. But I understand now what it was I was trying to get to. And this is the life where I make a major change in the direction of my karma. I'm cleaning house, and it feels really good. And it tells me there is so much left that is exciting, and to learn, and then to work with others, that in the learning and teaching, we will move in a very different direction. I trust that.
There is something that is coming up for me in these conversations between times and the recontextualization of teachings. Coming from a place of being a very young person, when I think about ancient wisdom that is recontextualized, I fear that I might fall, and we might fall into changing, altering the wisdom so that it serves our comfort or our desire for security. Especially as we move into uncertainty, there's this reflex to go, no, I need to be comfortable, I need to be. So I guess I bring up a question, which is how to cultivate that discernment between staying true to the teaching, but letting go of the form and embracing that rhythm instead. Sonali?
It reminded me of a story my grandmother told me about, honestly, it drives me crazy, the appropriation stuff around yoga, right, in its many forms, and the marketing around it, the business of it, when in our deepest teachings, this stuff of getting on your mat is one of 8 limbs, ways of being, right? In order to not just achieve full potential as an individual, it's always in service of the collective, that is human, non-human, other beings. And she said to me, coming to Chicago, the first time she came, which is, I said, gosh, doesn't it annoy you, all these folks, lots of white people in these big studios doing this yoga, but there's no surrendering to the divine. There's no surrendering to earth and the intellect, right? Meaning letting go of the intellect. For instance, that's one of the 8 limbs. And she said, in our teachings, we don't want to see the appropriation, but there's a constellation of medicine even in that one, the physical embodiment of yoga, and may that bring these people some health and well-being as they hopefully hold on to letting go of the conquering and controlling of the knowledge. It was a really profound moment around the medicinal purposes of this work while holding the tension that you're talking about, Asul. And I was weaving in something from what Bill had shared too about what's the opportunity for weaving these stories. And our elders in our village would say they're already braided, they're already sculpted. And so how do we ask the question of dipping into the deeper vibration that Haruko was talking about that goes beyond words in order to listen to the shape that's already there, right? So this is the past. This moment, even on the call, is the past. And so how can we engage in terms of these opportunities? What are the questions and what's the heart set and mindset, spirit set that we're even approaching the query, right? And then the other thing is, in terms of something that Mario shared, the smriti, as we've been taught, is always subordinate to surrendering to the shruti. So thinking about the forms of the reapplication, reinterpretation, the process of that deep listening is always in reference, it's sort of a deep reverence to the deeper wisdom, so that the forms or the branches that come through the smriti have a distinct tie in the roots and in the core. So I just, just a few things that I wanted to share, and that they're self-evident and community evidence. They live in us, even on this call. They're here inside, just waiting to be pulsed into, vibrated with, believing with, as Vanessa was talking about.
Sharon?
Yes, so this is, I think it follows the last few comments, Haruko talking about cleaning house and Asul asking this question about how we can receive these knowledges and dance with them without trying to make them conform to what we desire. And my initial kind of response was to something Sonali said, which is people in these institutions, including universities, which is where I spend a lot of my time, they're looking for like some kind of existential nourishment. They are starving for it, basically. Some of them know they are and they're looking for it. And some of them don't know they are, but they really need it. But either way, for both kinds of people, we don't generally know how to actually receive these gifts, even when they're made available. We tend to want to extract them and consume them on our terms and in very selective conditional ways, because that's how we're used to relating to knowledge. And as we say, this is really not an intellectual problem. It's not that we can't understand when someone describes, on an intellectual plane, but it doesn't land anywhere because we have so much affective and relational clutter in our existential garages. And we really just prefer to ignore this existential mess because this seems too overwhelming or difficult or just boring to do the work of cleaning it out. So we make it someone else's problem, and then we consume all this and nothing really shifts. We don't want to give up our autonomy, our sense of universal knowledge, our sense of exceptionalism, our sense of certainty and control. These are all really pleasurable things that we would have to give up if we're going to actually ethically and reciprocally receive and be moved by the gifts of these other ways of knowing and being, but generally want to take it and consume it without giving anything up, only letting in what's convenient and things that already fit our existing desires. So this question that I've been sitting with is, what kind of education or pedagogy or dance or art could actually move people to see that they need to clean out the shit in their garage? And of course, there's no one answer because it depends on the context and who is there and what will land there and what won't. But I think I have learned that it's not by describing the problem or describing the alternative, although I definitely fall into that trap sometimes because that's how I've been trained, but I know it doesn't work. So what would actually move people and activate that sense of movement that doesn't get captured by the clothes on the clothing lines, so that it's not an intellectual reasoned choice, but something from your insides that says, it just pulls you. And this would have to be not a pedagogy of description, but one of a pedagogy of movement and responsibility. And I don't know what that is, but I'm sitting with it. And this is helping. So thank you.
Peter? You're muted.
Yep. People like it that way. One of the things that I think about is our creation story starts in the beginning, before the beginning, and it has no ending. And I think this is important to think about. The question that was just asked, my wife has a really hard time dealing with academics because she says they never listen. When you're talking to them, they're already formulating an answer to what you're telling them, and they don't listen. And I think that in order to listen, you have to go and listen. And so one of the things that we do is to go fasting, and you have no water, no food for 4 days and 4 nights. And you go out in the bush and you isolate yourself and you try to stay awake all night. And you constantly ask for those answers. And I'm guaranteeing you that this will change you. It will change your perceptions. It will allow you to know how to listen. And when we do this, you probably won't get hungry. You might, but for sure you're going to get thirsty. And you're going to understand and appreciate what water is. And when you break that fast, and usually they give you a strawberry or a berry of some kind, you will appreciate what food is. And when you drink that first water, you'll feel that water go right through your whole body. And when you do this, it's a big sacrifice. And what we say is, you're not fasting for yourself, you're fasting for other people, because your other people are going to benefit. And the way we do this, the way I was shown how to do this anyway, is that you might have 4 or 5 people out fasting. We try to bring them all at the same time. And we give them an opportunity to share what they've experienced in their fast. And people will come and listen to them, because sometimes what you experience and what you dream about might be an answer for a question that they have. And so I encourage everyone to do this at least once in your lifetime. And I say fast, I mean fast, no food, no water for 4 days. And, doctors say, well, you can't do that, you're going to die. Well, I should have been dead a few times by now, but I'm still here. And it also teaches you what you can do. That, it shows you what the human being can do. And the one time I went fasting at the end of 4 days, I didn't want to come back in. And you reach a state where you can listen. And, like a couple of, I guess 2 years ago, I put out 2 guys fasting in the springtime. And when I broke their fast, I broke their fast while they're still in the bush. And when I gave that man his water, he started crying. He was 50 some odd years old. He started crying. And what he said was, I never have ever been so thankful in my life for the things that are in my life as I was when I was out there. And, it makes you appreciate what you have. And, these kind of things, like, I have a hard time too, because I have one of those brains that bounces all over the place. Someone yells squirrel, I'm off over this direction and running all over. And it takes concentration for me to, if I have to do something that I have to focus on, I have to work at that. I don't know if everybody else's brain is like that or not, but mine is. But the other part that I wanted to share was, we have a symbol. And this symbol is a depiction of time. And with this symbol, there's 3 legs off of this symbol: the past, the present, and the future, but they're all connected. So time, we think about, going ahead, backwards, or whatever, but they're all connected. We shouldn't separate them. We should look at them and keep them in balance. The head, the present, and the back. Because they are all connected. I mean, when you see a frog swimming in the water, his legs at the back and his legs on the front are connected to his belly. The frog is swimming in the water, and it's all, the legs are the back, the belly is the middle, the present, and the front legs are the future. But it all moves together. Anyway, better quit talking now. My wife says I talk too much, and lots of people agree with her. Big witch.